Good morning. Now, hopefully most of you are aware that tomorrow is a special day as well. Tomorrow is Mother's Day. And so I decided to speak to my mother and inform her that I was giving a really big speech today. And I said, Mom, I have this big speech to give at Sonoma State. Usually jokes help to open up a speech. Are there any jokes that you know that you could share with me? And she said, well, sweetie, I think that's a really good idea, but you're not very funny. And so you should do what you do best, which is to speak from the heart. And that's what I built a career on. That's truly who I am through and through, and that's what I hope to do in front of each of you today. But I find that a lot of times speakers get up in front of crowds, and they really speak just in service of their own personal mission. And the true great speeches are actually in service of an audience. And so just so that I can get a little bit of a sense of who is here today, just by a show of hands, how many people here are students? All right, you guys are easy to identify. How many people here are parents? How many people here are grandparents? All right, how many people here are the grandchild of someone? If anyone did not raise their hand, there's something wrong. Just want to make sure you guys are with me. So, my story really starts with one thing, and it's my family. And that's why I asked each of you to raise your hands. I think it's really tough to tell where you're going unless you know where you come from. And I grew up in a really closely knit family, but I had an older brother. And as a child, having a brother who's 2 years older than me, I spent most of my time not actually competing against my friends, but competing against his friends. I played almost every sport possible, but basketball was really my thing. And I found that I wasn't as interested in competing against the kids my age. I was always competing against the older, the bigger kids. And that's been one of the consistent themes that I realized I've experienced. I've constantly wanted to play against the bigger kids. And that's one thing that for each of you graduates, you are now going to be thrust into. You're no longer going to be competing against your peer set. You will become a part of, quote, real life. But what I want to share with you guys today are 5 lessons that I've learned, because it wasn't that long ago that I was in each of your positions. I'm guessing you can tell I'm not that old. And so hopefully these 5 things that I'll share with you guys are pieces of wisdom that come from a place of authenticity, and more than anything, they come from a place of personal experience. And so the first one is this idea that true self-discovery begins where your comfort zone ends. In my case, I was playing basketball in college. I was a 20-year-old sophomore at Braun University, and I had what I thought was the dream life. When I was growing up as a kid, I used to watch March Madness, and I used to see the guys at the end of the bench with their arms interlocked during the NCAA tournament cheering on the stars. And I desperately wanted to be one of those guys, just a bench warmer on a Division I team. And somehow, I climbed my way there. And I found myself playing sports. I had a girlfriend that I was into and good friends. But I looked at the path ahead of me, and at the time, I wanted to work on Wall Street and develop a career in finance more than anything else. But I looked at that path, and I thought, something, I know what this is going to be. And I saw a film called Baraka that was shot in 24 different countries. And I remember distinctly as a sophomore feeling like somebody had kicked me in my gut, because I saw the way that the rest of the world lived. I had never known that these parts of the developing world had such experiences that I was seeing on this screen. And so I thought, something, as much as I'm comfortable, I'm content, I have to get out of my comfort zone. And when you study the great artists, when you look at the great musicians, their greatest works, the ones that have truly influenced culture, did not come out of a period of peaceful happiness in their life. It's often during periods of immense struggle. It's when someone broke their heart. It's when their culture was rife with conflict that these incredible pieces of art explosively emerged. And so I thought, I have to get out of my comfort zone. And I went on a program called Semester at Sea. And while I was on Semester at Sea, I had a habit of asking one child in each country that we went to, what do you want most in the world? And I would have them write it down on a piece of paper. And when I got to India, where the poverty was the most devastating that I had ever seen in my life, I found this young boy who was begging on the streets. And I'd never met a child like that begging on the streets. And I felt so helpless. And I said, if you could have anything in the world, what would you want? He was my one child in that country. And he looked at me, and his answer was not what I thought he would say. It wasn't a house. It wasn't, some nice car or a boat or anything that one of us would probably guess. He looked at me, and he said if he could have anything in the world, this boy, who was a true street beggar, said a pencil. And that was it. If he could have anything in the world, it would be a pencil. And what I realized was that he had never been to school before. And that was the reality for millions of children around the world, that they've never had any access to any form of quality education. And if I thought back in my own family history, it was only 2 generations ago that my grandparents were living in a rural countryside in what we would deem to be the developing world. And I guarantee that if any of you here actually trace back your own lineage, within at least 2, 3 generations, but not much more, you would find that there was somebody who allowed you to get to your position today because of the sacrifices that they made, but most importantly, because they invested in their own education and ultimately the educational well-being of your family. And so first and foremost, I want to commend each of you, but more than anything, I want to commend the lineage that you are derived from, who invested in your well-being by making a commitment to education, which you all are honoring by graduating here today. And so after this boy asked me for this pencil, I became obsessed with backpacking and traveling. And I told my parents, I want to travel as much as I can. And they looked at me and they said, Adam, we will support you, just not financially. And so they put a mandate in front of me. They said, if you go out and find a way to make some money, you can do what you want with it. And that sparked this entrepreneurial commitment within me, that I had to find ways to start small businesses, work different jobs, and whatever money I would make, I would take and pretty much buy a one-way ticket to either Guatemala or Thailand or somewhere else and travel for as long as I could. And what I found was that time and time again, there were 2 types of people that were working on massive, massive forms of impact in the world, that were committed to true social good and positivity. And a lot of them either had pure passion, they were incredibly committed, they lived in these communities, and they were driven by passion, but those people often lacked for-profit business acumen. And then you had on the other side the business community that was so dedicated to the well-being of others, but oftentimes they lacked the knowledge on the ground in these communities. And what I realized is that the generations are obviously shifting in pretty immense ways. But one of the things that I've seen is, when you look back to kind of the greatest generation and even before then, people sought to make a lot of money, to hopefully support their own families, and then with that capital, they ended up waiting to give it on to impact the world after they passed. And what we've seen with the greatest generation and the baby boomers, essentially the graduates' parents, is this commitment to say, in my lifetime, I want to see social good created. And what I think is coming out of millennials and this generation, your generation, is the idea that it's actually through the work that you undertake that you will create positive good in the world. But one of the things that I've experienced is that only happens when you combine for-profit business acumen with true humanitarian, almost non-profit idealism. And as you start to choose your next job and the job after that and the job after that, you guys are going to be faced with some very tough decisions. So the second thing that I wanted to share with you is that there are 3 forms of compensation. No matter what somebody tells you, there's actually 3 forms. The first one is money, right? How much money are you paid for your job, which is what most people have valued for generations. But what I've seen is that there is a second form, which is mastery. It's actually the learnings that job will afford you. And then there's a third one, which is meaning. It's purpose. It's how can you connect to a broader whole. And at different points in your life, you are going to be offered positions that provide different levels of compensation in those 3 categories. And what I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt is that at this stage in your life, as graduates, thinking about the first 5 or 10 years of your career, you should entirely focus on mastery. The learnings in the next 5 to 10 years will prepare you for a life ahead that will allow for not only money, not only meaning, but the type of life that you want to live on your own terms. So what I did is I ended up going to work at a company called Braun. It was a great consulting firm. And I had on paper this seemingly dream job. But I didn't have this sense of passion within my days. And I really believe this. Big dreams start with small, unreasonable acts. And so I had this idea. I wanted to try to find a way to build one school in the developing world and dedicate it to my 80-year-old grandmother. I just didn't think a set of golf clubs or an all-you-can-eat sushi buffet would be enough for her 80th. And so I went to the bank in my hometown in October of 2008, and I said, I have this idea. I want to start this organization called Pencils of Promise. What does it take? And the woman behind the desk said to me, well, in order to start a new bank account, you have to begin with at least $25. And I was turning 25 that month, and so I thought it was a good karmic sign. So I gave her $25 in hopes of trying to find a way to build one school. And for anybody that believes that in order to create something large in terms of scale or significance, there's this pervasive idea that you have to have money, you have to have wealth, you have to have power, you have to have influence. But I am here to prove to you that you don't. That you can start with as little as $25 and an enormous idea and create something that will truly transform the world and the lives around you. And so with Pencils of Promise, we hope to build just one school initially. And fortunately, my job had something called an externship where I could leave, and I asked friends to give donations instead of birthday presents, and in our first 2 years, entirely through small contributions, we were able to raise the money for our very first school. And so I took a break from my job and went out to Laos, where we built our first school, and when I came back, I found that I was actually a terrible employee at my company. I called in sick for 2 straight weeks. I wasn't particularly committed to these clients anymore. But I ultimately became faced with this question. Was I going to stay at my job, or was I going to leave to work on this organization that I was so passionate about and do so out of my apartment, my tiny apartment in the East Village in New York? And this is where the third piece of advice comes in, which is to make the little decisions with your head and the big ones with your heart. Because at that point in my life, I had to make a big decision. And as much as my head told me, stick with the safe job, keep making the good money, my heart told me that if I didn't pursue this full time, that I wouldn't fulfill a sense of purpose. And when you find your sense of purpose, it's so much more than a sense of passion, because you become truly unstoppable. And so I left my job, I started working on this organization, and at the time we had, I think, 2 schools in March of 2010. And this is where the fourth piece of advice comes in, which is to speak the language of the person you seek to become, not who you are right now. What I found is that in default conversations in New York, people that you meet at a bar, they say, so what do you do? And the conversation, oh, I'm 24, 25, I work at this company, Bain, was a boring one. It wasn't one that I was excited about. And for each of you, people are about to ask you those questions. They're going to say, where'd you go to school? They're going to say, what was your major? What are you doing next? And I'd highly encourage you to not speak in the present tense and to not speak about the future tense, but to speak as if you are the person that you hope to become. Speak with an aspirational tone of the future self. So in my case, I stopped saying, well, I'm a consultant at Bain. I started saying, well, I'm working at Bain right now, but one day I'm going to start an NGO that builds schools around the world and helps create a world in which we see education for all. And the more that I had those conversations, people started to say, oh, well, what are you going to do about the teachers? Which country are you going to build schools in? And they almost forced me to live my way into the answers. And not only that, but the opportunities that were unearthed because of those conversations were ones in which people would say, well, actually, if you're trying to build a school here, then I know this guy who's building a school himself in Tanzania. Or I know this woman who's doing teacher training in Nepal. And so the opportunities, the introductions that were afforded my way were as a result, not of my present self, but the future self that I aspirationally hope to become. And so, what I also realized in kind of relentlessly pursuing this vision was that I don't think that I'm special. As much as I'm able to stand in front of each of you guys here today, I hope what you're realizing is that within a matter of years, each of you could be standing up here as well. You don't have to be special, because I don't think I am. You just have to be unreasonable. And there's a big difference there. And what I came to understand was that because I consistently was the youngest person in each of the rooms that I was meeting with other individuals within and speaking about this organization, was that there is so much power in youth. And time again, people will tell young people, you have to wait, right? It's not your time yet. Well, I'm here to tell you, That is bullshit. The single most powerful element of youth is that you don't know yet what is impossible. Right? You don't have that wisdom to know that something can or cannot be done. And within that lack of knowledge becomes this incredible ability for each of you to prove what can be made possible because you are willing to try. You know, I learned recently that Martin Luther King, as much as we think of him as this kind of incredible man of stature and significance, he was only 26 when he led the Montgomery bus boycotts. 26. Right? The most powerful voice in global education today is Malala Yousafzai, who is 16 years old. You are never too young to get started. And so the final piece of advice is around this question of what do I want my life to stand for? Because when I was on semester at sea, a couple things happened, and I've had a couple different experiences in the developing world while traveling where I was sure that I was going to perish that day. I thought my life was coming to an end. And what you realize when you think your life is about to end is that when it disappears, you will not take anything with you. You won't have physical possessions. But the only thing that will remain is the footprints that you've left behind and the legacy of the life that you've lived. And each of us has this distinct opportunity to create a life that not only we are excited to share with others, but that our future generations will share about us. And so this fifth idea is to make your life a story worth telling. And the period in which that becomes defined is in your 20s. It's in this decade that you all are part of right now. You know, I've recently discovered, as I just turned 30, that your 20s are about both fighting and accepting your way into the person you are destined to become. And so I wrote something recently, right as I turned 30, about the most important lesson that I learned in my 20s. And I realized that I'd written a journal entry about a year into Pencils of Promise. And I remember thinking, I think I was about 27 at the time, that, you know, I remember writing, if we build 30 schools by the time I turned 30, I could die a happy man. That's what I had written. I just felt like I would feel so good about that. And as I turned 30, I actually looked around me and I looked at this organization that we had built. And now Pencils of Promise, as I turned 30, has built more than 200 schools around the world. Thank you. But here's where I was wrong, which is that I cannot die a happy man right now. I can't. Because I still want to do so much more. And as soon as something becomes possible, you start thinking about what you can do next. Each room in which I gave a talk gave me the confidence to go bigger. Each country that I traveled to made me hungry to experience the next. And no matter how late I stayed up, I always had an urge to watch the sun rise. So as I stand before you here today, I now realize what my 20s taught me. There's no such thing as best. The finish line to living the perfect life doesn't exist. It's in constant motion, just ahead of our grasp, moving forward at the same rate of acceleration as the expectations that will inevitably trail our accomplishments. You will screw up, you will be celebrated, and you will feel like a winner and a loser in the same day. And that will happen over and over. But the people who succeed are those who dust themselves off and keep going because they're not motivated by hitting their goals. They're motivated by getting to a place where they can set new goals that seem just as unreasonable as the ones before them once did. Now take a moment to just grasp that idea. The most successful people that I've met in my life are not motivated by hitting their goals. They're motivated by getting to a place where they can confidently and audaciously move the finish line once again off into the future where it seems just as uncertain as it once did before. So set incredibly ambitious goals, chase them with fervor, move the finish line consistently off into the distance, and in doing so, you will consistently retain a little bit of a sense of fear, which is what I'm sure each of you feel today, both excitement and fear. But there's one mantra that's guided me throughout the last decade of my life, and I hope that it guides each of you going forward. It's a statement by Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who said, "If your dreams do not scare you, then they are not big enough." Thank you so much, and congratulations.